Hi, welcome to my channel and welcome to my second Q&A style video. So I've just taken a few general questions and problems that have arisen during drawing, and I'm aiming to answer a few of those today. So these are answers for my online drawing class, but I mean they apply to anybody, whether you're drawing with pastel pencils or not. You'll get something from it. So to start with, I'm going to answer the question of how do I choose my palette to construct an underpainting? Now, this is a difficult question to answer because, of course, every drawing is going to be different, and it's going to be different because the subject is different, so it's going to be different color, but also I might use a different color piece of paper as well. So that is the first thing to take into account when you're choosing your underpainting, when you're choosing your paper actually for your subject. You should do a little palette first. So let's say we take the foxes, for example. We know that we've got a lot of that ginger red fur on the foxes, and it's going to be a dominant color for the drawing. So we need to make sure that we've got a color of paper that's going to support and give us a good range in those colors. If we were to do it on a dark blue, if you put a palette of those colors down onto the dark blue paper, you will realize that actually the colors don't show up that well and we don't get a very big range. So that's the first thing to consider even before you start. But when it comes to an underpainting, what am I looking for? So I'll look for the top colors, and again with the fox we've got those reds and gingers in the fur, and then I think about desaturating that color. So desaturation is a color that has got less pigment in it, basically it's got less color in it. It's going towards grays and browns. So we looked at this actually in the Nuthatch tutorial. It was a good introduction, and there's a free ebook for it as well if you want to find out about desaturated colors. You can find it in the link below, and that gives you a really great introduction if you're not familiar with them. So I think about those top colors that I can see in my reference photo, and then I think about the desaturated version, and this is going to tell me whether I'm going to go towards grays or browns. So the reason for this is because the colors that we see beneath the top layer of fur are going to be darker. Not as much light is going to get to them, and when not as much light gets to a color, like let's say this top, I was going to a darker room, this top would appear dull. It would also appear darker, but it would appear dull. So that's the desaturation. So that's what I'm thinking about. So with the yellows, if we have like maybe a yellow flower or something, you desaturate that. A good pencil for that would be the 182, which is an ochre color. It's a golden brown color. So we're heading towards brown, but it's that sort of goldy color. If I'm going to, for example, do a ginger coloured animal, then instead, when we start to take the colour out of that, we are going much more just brown. And a good pencil for that would be the 283, which is like a very desaturated, it's not got a lot of colour in it, burgundy brown. But you can also use like the walnut brown, the 177, that would work really well. So what I'm thinking about the general colour for the piece. We don't want to go and use grey up in here. If we were to use grey, that wouldn't be right. When we put the ginger fur on top, they wouldn't really relate to each other. Of course, for the grey fur on the foxes, I am using a grey for that. That makes sense there. So we need to think about the top layer, what we want to end up with, and take a little bit of colour out of that, reduce the tone, take the tone darker, and then we're getting towards which pencils you will need for your underpainting. So when it comes to seeing tone is quite tricky to see. There are a couple of tricks that we can use to help us learn how to see tone better. It takes a little while, so don't expect to do it overnight. This is the kind of thing you've just got to keep plucking away at. It took me a couple of years, and now I see it much more accurately. So when we're looking for tone, we're not thinking about colour at all, and that is so tricky because some colours appear to be totally different, and if we took a photo and turned it black and white, they might appear actually the same tone of grey. So it can be really tricky to distinguish between them. So when you're figuring out your underpainting tones, where do you start? Well, the best thing to do is take your reference photo and turn it black and white. Let's get rid of all of that colour. And then if you take one of the palettes that you did yourself, you know, we've got the different coloured pastel paper. If you take one of those palettes, take a photo of that and turn that black and white, much more easy to see the tones of your pencils as well. So that will really help you. You can take your reference photo in black and white, then you can take your palette that you've turned black and white, and you can see which pencils are going to work best for which areas. And of course, you've got to remember that, okay, in colour, maybe the tone that's right for the underpainting, you know it's actually a green, and we need brown. So you need to obviously take that into account, but it will show you the true tone of your pencils much better. So that is a really good way to start getting into the world of tone, and it's quite an easy way to get into it as well. So when you're doing your drawing, it can be quite difficult to retain that balance as we work through. So what I would usually say is start with the eye. The eye is going to have your lightest light and the darkest dark in it. We're going to have the black of the pupil and then possibly up to the white in the reflection, certainly a very, very light grey. And what that does is, visually for us, it helps us see our exposures better. Our eyes can say, right, that's really dark, that's black. It's not going to get any darker than that. We don't have a darker pencil. And this is white. I can't go any lighter than that. So all of the tones for the underpainting are going to have to fall in that range, and it really helps you see the range much better, because if we put down just the darks and we didn't go near the lights until the end, it's really difficult to judge what is actually dark if you haven't got a light on there. You could get to the end and find that actually you've done the whole drawing sort of mid-tone and you haven't gone dark enough, or the whole thing is too dark. So you need to give yourself a bit of contrast to work with. That will help you create the underpainting. So I do the eye first and then I work into the underpainting. I usually pick out the darkest areas to start with because they're quite easy to pick out, and then I work up from there. But I also work, and this is another key point, I'll work in light layers. So if I work in light layers, it means, let's say I've used that dark walnut brown, and I know that it needs to be really dark where I've put that, maybe around the back of the ear or something like that. If I put down a light layer, it means that if I have made a mistake, as I'm adjusting and fixing and tightening up the rest of the underpainting, I can go back in, either lift a little bit off with the putty rubber and go in with a lighter pencil, or just glaze over with a lighter pencil. If I do every mark on the painting with total confidence and really, really boldly covering the board, then if you make a mistake or you need to make an adjustment, it's going to be very tricky. You've only got so much room in the tooth of the card to add pastel, and once you've filled it up, you can't add any more. It will actually just crumble off. So I always work in light layers, and that will really help you adjust your underpainting as you work through. So your underpainting, what is an underpainting, is like a very basic version of your drawing. It's the overall structure. So if we take the foxes, and this is coming out as an online tutorial soon, we can see that there is a very dark area for the ear. So that would go in as a dark shape. We need a dark shape down here for this shadow coming down the side of the jaw, and then underneath the jaw we can also see that that's nice and dark under the fur. We want some dark areas around the eye to show that the structure of the eye socket, but also that she's closed her eyes and she's actually pulling them, squeezing them shut. And so those muscles are clenching around her eye. So we are showing that depth here with a shadow. And again, around the muzzle, around the nose, we're showing the shadow coming down from the nose, and also the lower jaw is in shadow. So that would all go in very basic as darker tones. And then other areas such as the bridge of the nose, which are lighter, for an underpainting I wouldn't go in with a very bright pencil, but I would go in with a light mid-tone pencil that I can easily work on top of with lighter tones. So you're simplifying your whole structure when you do an underpainting, and you're just picking out the key areas. So the last thing to think about when you're looking at an underpainting, you're simplifying that whole structure and you're looking for tone, is that we don't want to add lots of range to the whole drawing. So if we look at the little nuthatch here, we can see that actually the shadow underneath his belly, it's a block shadow, and we've got lots of details instead in the areas which are lit. Now you can reverse that, but what this is doing is making the most of the range of tones that we have available. If we look at the world around us, we have an absolutely vast variety of tones from dark to light. And every time we focus on something, like if I focused on the dark plant, my pupils will dilate to let in more light so that I can better see the dark areas of the plant. And then if I look outside where it's lighter, my pupils will contract to let in less light, and I can see more details in those bright areas instead of it being overexposed and just flat. So we have to do the same in the drawing. Apart from anything else, we have only got pigment to take us from black to white. We're not working with light, we're only working with pigment. And the range that we've got is actually much, much smaller. So what we have to do is squash our tones together a little bit. Now this is getting a little bit technical, but it's a good thing to start to think about. So in very basic terms, all this really means is you've got to decide whether to put details in the shadows or in the highlights, but you don't put them in both. If you're putting details in both, then you're overexposing. It's like walking outside and being blinded by the sun and everything just appears flat and white. You've put details absolutely everywhere and it's become flat because we haven't got the range to go dark enough for those shadows to get a nice rounded form, or to go light enough for the highlights to pull out those top details. So instead, what I usually do is go for nice flat shadows. They're nice and dark, they're well filled in, and then I carefully model them out into those mid-tones, at which point I can start putting on the details. And the brightest details and the areas which have the finest work will be the highlights usually, especially when we're working on subjects instead of doing landscapes. We really want to pick out those areas such as on the wings, which are catching the light, and it will draw our attention and focus to the subject. So I hope that's helped answer a few questions about how you start an underpainting. You're looking for a desaturated version of the general top colour on your drawing. So, as I say, orange for the fox. You're then reducing that in tone a little bit so that we're showing that not as much light is getting to those underlayers. And then when we start to put lighter layers over the top of that, it brings out the fur. And the fur is nicely contrasted against those darker browns underneath. And the oranges can appear quite vibrant, and we can really see the hair for hair detail. So turn your reference photo black and white. You can turn your drawings black and white to help you see if you're being accurate. And that's a really good way to start better seeing tone as well. I hope you've enjoyed this short Q&A, and if you'd like to find out more about the online lessons, then you can find them in the link below to my Gumroad channel.